Marcus Goody Goodlow is a Martin Luther King Jr. scholar who mentors students, educators, law enforcement, and people of all walks of life. He guides them through cultural and interpersonal relationships, leadership, character formation, and so much more. Goody serves as a church elder and active volunteer in the Los Angeles community, also working with law enforcement and community activists to foster better understanding and education on fairness and justice and cooperative policing. The Dallas Baptist University Marcus Goody Goodlow Scholarship is awarded to students who exemplify the life of a kingmaker set by the example of Martin Luther King Jr. Please welcome Goody Goodlow.
Well, hello. It's great to be with you, Debbie, and all of your watchers, listeners. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So, Martin Luther King Jr. inspired a lot of people, but you've taken it to a completely higher level in the work that you do and by creating your book, Kingmaker. So, what made you follow in this path?
Yeah, well, no, thanks for the question. I appreciate the opportunity to have a chance to visit with you and all of your viewers and listeners. Dr. King was a unique figure in human history and world history, and for a whole host of reasons. And since I was, I think, in grade school, I remember being enamored by his life and legacy and leadership. As part of my work as my involvement as an athlete myself, and then, of course, later years in life, my role as a spiritual advisor, spiritual leader to help influence people who were in the areas of athletics initially, and then eventually sometime when I moved back here to Los Angeles. Of course, as you know, being in LA, a good deal of the people are involved in the entertainment industry. In fact, statistics say that 1/3 of the people in LA are in some way connected to the entertainment industry. And what we found with those two groups of people, athletes and entertainers, whether that's in music and television and film, etc., is that, as Biggie says, more money, more problems.
Mm.
They are not immune from challenges, whether that's issues related to their spirituality and faith, or issues related to social justice, relationships, dysfunctional, whatever it may be. They are like me and you. And what I discovered is over 50 years ago, there was a pastor to these people of influence.
Mm.
I like to say that we're all equal in essence. We're not all equal in influence. And athletes and entertainers are some of the most influential people on the planet. We buy our clothes because an athlete says to buy them. We'll travel to a particular destination because an athlete says go there. We'll take out credit with a credit card company. We'll buy a perfume. We'll buy a product to eat because an athlete or an entertainer says this is good, or this is my brand, or this is what I like. And so Dr. King realized, I think, something that many of us have come to know is that Harry Belafonte has a great saying. He says that artists are the gatekeepers of truth.
Mm.
And I think Dr. King recognized that. He enlisted them, he recruited them, he admonished them, he challenged them, he pastored them to get involved in the civil rights movement. And so many lent their voices, their money, their time, and to help advance the civil rights movement. And so for me, 50 years plus later, if you just have just been awake in the last few years, you've seen athletes and entertainers using their platforms for good. I can give you a number of examples, but that's pretty much the gist of it in terms of King's legacy, his leadership. He's really the first person we know in human history to do what he did, and that was to not only enlist blue collar workers, educators, just sort of everyday people who were just trying to make a living, trying to be accepted in a society, as Doc Rivers says, in this America place where we do everything we can to love America, but America doesn't seem to love us back. Dr. King said, listen, just because you are a person of influence, have money and resources, doesn't absolve you from being involved in this struggle. And so he enlisted them, called them to a greater purpose than hitting a ball, running fast, jumping high, or singing on a stage.
Mm. Wow. How would you describe what being a Martin Luther King scholar is?
Well, yeah, no. So it's a tall tale. So what I tell people in postgraduate work, and of course, you know this. I'm sure many of your viewers, listeners, know this as well. I am a King scholar, and most scholars are in a very specific lane. So if you imagine being in a bowling alley, and you may see other lanes, but there is your lane. When you bowl, you're not like bowling the ball down multiple lanes. You're in your lane. My lane is very specific because thus PhD work, postgraduate work, and it's in King's leadership with athletes and entertainers during the civil rights movement. So it's very specific. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't consider myself someone who was fully aware of all the ins and outs of King's life. But as it relates to this area, leading, influencing entertainers and athletes through a very specific time in history, particularly the window of the civil rights movement, we know that in terms of him, at least from 1955 to 1968, the year of his demise. The beginning years, the year of the Montgomery bus boycott. That's the area that I focused on. And what I did was I examined things he did, things he said, how he interacted and engaged these two unique groups of individuals. And of course, I qualified what entertainers and athletes were. And then it's basically a historical analysis. And so, like most scholars, I went to primary sources. And so I've held documents and read speeches and looked at receipts and looked at copies of ledgers and notes as it relates to his interactions and workings with athletes and entertainers during the civil rights movement and what he was appealing for them to, calling them to do, asking them to do, enlisting them to do. And so that's what I was able to unearth. And then the book, I wrote a book basically off of it called Kingmaker, which is just a snippet, a snapshot of some of those insights that I learned from Dr. King's life as it relates to athletes and entertainers during the civil rights movement.
So tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got to the moment where you made the decision this is what you were going to do.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, a place called Compton, and I tell people I don't have to
Straight
watch
out of
the
Compton.
I didn't have to watch the movie or wear the T-shirt. I have the birth certificate. And so was born in South Central Los Angeles and was just really someone who committed my life, if you will, to even as an athlete. I just remember being enamored studying Dr. King's life and his speeches. Back then, you could order his tapes. You could order his speeches on cassette tapes. That many of your listeners may even not know what cassette tapes are, but you could order his speeches on cassette tape, listen to those speeches, which is something I did. And he had these, you could choose why I opposed the war in Vietnam, sleeping through a revolution, a knock at midnight, I have a dream, and all these. I've been to the mountaintop. And I remember listening to those speeches on a little Sony Walkman cassette player, and just was amazed. I felt like I knew this man. And as an athlete, I learned very early on that I had a unique gift of leadership, and I was always kind of the person leading and being outspoken on issues, not just related to the field. And of course, for me, I was looking for a framework. Even if I didn't understand that language at the time, I've always believed that athletes and entertainers were people of influence. That was something I took to knowledge very early on, understanding very on. And then when I read more and more of Dr. King, I discovered, wait, there's somebody who's far, far smarter than me, far much more influential than me, such a great leader who really put together the first modality or framework in terms of how to go about enlisting and recruiting, and then having those people help to advance what I call the greatest advancement in terms of human rights that this country has ever known, the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Here, here. So was Baptist University where you also received seminary training, or did you receive?
No, no. So I went to the University of New Mexico, which is where I played football. Go Lobos! Everybody's a Lobo. And then I went to a school in San Francisco. It's no longer there. It was called Golden Gate Seminary. It's now changed the name, and it's now located in Riverside. It's called Gateway. But and then from there went to various nonprofit organizations, including churches, some other places, and then earned my postgraduate work, which is where I did my studies at Dallas Baptist University. And so, studied at Oxford for a summer, traveled extensively to the birthplace of Dr. King and also to various other places where his materials are housed, and did my research. Literally, I tell people, like, you as a young person would walk to your library around the corner. Well, I got on a plane and flew to libraries for my graduate studies, and just really spent 5 years doing that, just trying to examine and learn about this man who told America about a dream he had.
What's one of your favorite memories from school?
Oh God, gosh, there's so many. I think certainly in my in my studies, it would be doing things like collaborating with my colleagues, and cramming and preparing for comps, or doing pulling all nighters, but just getting a place to travel. I was, as being involved in athletics, you're afforded opportunities to travel the country, travel the world in some instances. And so going back to my time as an undergrad, I mean, and even in high school, I was, even though I grew up in Compton, and eventually went on from there to Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where I went to school, play football. Because of athletics, I had traveled, I had been places, and of course, I have had an opportunity to meet different people and be in different spaces and places. And culturally speaking, obviously Albuquerque being one of the most rich in terms of culture and aesthetics, its beauty, its people, from Native American, the Hispanic, Latino, of course, African Americans who are there. Just being able to travel and literally across the country to go play, a game of basketball, a game of football, the eating, the culture, the people, the sights, the scenes, just athletics and entertainment, I would say, affords you opportunities to do a lot of good things, to meet a lot of great people in this country and in this world, for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Who are a couple of good role models for leadership that you see today?
Oh, I think, we are, it's interesting because I think we are at a unique time in history. We're at a crossroads of sort. And I think, David Brooks, who's a great writer, actually a friend of mine, he writes for the New York Times, best-selling author, has a book called The Road to Character. And he talks about, in that book, eulogy virtues versus resume virtues. And, I think so many times we define leaders by what the things they accumulated or what they've accomplished. But I've learned from David and others that leadership is often defined by issues related to those intangibles, those unique sort of etchings, if you will, that define a person beyond the resume. Gratitude, generosity, compassion, selflessness, sacrifice. Those are not quantified in resumes, on CVs, curriculum vitae. And so for me, who are those people? People who are no longer with us, people like MLK, obviously Rosa Parks, the great John Lewis, people like that. People who are still in my life, are still around in my time. Obviously, my mom is someone who I've always looked to. My adopted father, my surrogate father, didn't grow up with a dad, but Chet Stewart, he's a business leader, a person of great faith. Took over a company, the family business, when he was 26 years old, and built it and led it for nearly 50 years. He's retired now, but he, as well as, I would say, people like, I'm a big fan of people in not just in the academic academy, but people in the sports world. We just lost another one. The great Bill Russell was somebody
Yes.
I looked up to, in terms of not just for his accomplishments on the court, but for what he modeled on the field. I alluded to John Lewis, who we just lost a couple of years ago. So people like that, who I just felt like, for me, always represented the best of who we are as a nation, the ideals for which they embody, for which they stand for.
We're seeing a shift in society right now where, at least in the workplaces, where poor leadership is is receiving a lot less tolerance from workers, and thus, a lot of the jobs are being left unfilled. Is there a simple fix to this? Is this a societal thing, or is this going to be a long, painful lesson that managers are either going to have to learn or suffer the consequences? And then also, if there are so many jobs out there that people are, so many jobs that have terrible leadership, what do the people that need jobs do? Or is that something that can be, I mean, because you work in the community, I think that you might have an interesting perspective on that.
Yeah, the last part of your question I got. The first part, if you could just repeat it real quick for me. The first part, it kind of went in and out, but repeat that first part for me again.
Sure. The shift in society where, and a lot of that has to do with the last couple of years
Sure.
of COVID, where
Gotcha.
workers are not having this bad leadership
Got it.
anymore.
Got it. No, I often say, Deb, for you and your listeners, people don't quit jobs, they quit people.
Hmm.
We have generally speaking, Americans have a tolerance for a lot of things. We're forgiving. We're forgiving people. We're people. I've come to in my time working with leaders and people of organizations. People will endure low pay, difficult working conditions at times. Maybe a dilapidated building. Maybe this computer is not the latest model that I have at my desk that has been given to me by my job to work on. Long hours. There are times in the job where it's just a grind, and you're pushing through frustration over budget procedures, and I don't quite have enough money in my particular department or in my pocketbook. But here's what I found: if people are serving alongside someone they respect, working along someone that says she gets me as a leader, I am valued by him as a leader. All those things, not that they're not important, they become less important because people say,
Mm.
you know what, these conditions may be temporary, but man, this person is all in with me. I'm all in with them. I'm for the mission of the company, for the mission of the organization. The ebb and flows of it, I can hang, I can tolerate. But, it's the dysfunction of leaders as relates to leading their people. I often say, uh, I'm good with being in relationships with people where we both have dysfunctions in terms of who we are as people. Like we're all fragile. We're we're finite beings. Another colleague of mine used to say we're all hypocrites in transition. Here's what I'm not cool with. I'm not cool with being in relationships that are dysfunctional.
Mm.
So one is about me. Look, man, I got my idiosyncrasies. I got my issues, my struggles, my hurts, my harms, my habits. I accept that. I see that, Deb. I embrace that. The totality of you as a person. I'm good with that. It's the dysfunction in our relationship, I think, that is the where the rubber meets the road for so many people. And let's face it, in a democracy and in a free flowing economy like ours, where people have options, and
Mhm.
those options are oftentimes, I'm all for the open market because with that, people have choices, and now it is about things like those intangibles, best practices, and having people that feel valued. It's not just about what's in the manual of our employee handbook, right? Let's take COVID, for example. Like there were pivots and adjustments that needed to be made in the time of a global pandemic that none of us could account for, right?
Right.
And so what we needed is, and what we need still are employers and to be sympathetic, to be empathetic, to be patient. I mean, I tell people sometimes we think sitting in a staff or team meeting that the obstacle is the issue we're discussing. And as a leader, we can't see why we're getting so much headway to advance forward this issue, so much pushback. And what I often have concluded in my time working with law enforcement officers, working with people in the entertainment industry, working with presidents of universities and different nonprofit organizations, is sometimes the issue is not about what we're discussing. The issue is I just found out my mom has a positive COVID test. I'm worried
Mm.
about her breathing, or I'm here at this job and, oh, by the way, the local school district has decided to amend their policies with regards to mask mandates and also online. That means stay at home for the kids. That means I got to account for my son or daughter being taken care of. And so when employees show up at their place of work, they're bringing the totality of who they are to that space. And I just think in 2022, man, leaders have to be mindful of that. I want to have now, in most instances, your business, people need to earn their keep. I get that. But I just think leaders, it behooves them to be more tolerant, to be, Doris Kearns Goodwin, the great presidential historian, said the number one quality that a leader has to have is empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy. And empathy it has a texture. Maya Angelou, the great poet, said, "People may forget what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And so
Mm.
when I think of leaders having tremendous sway. Leadership has texture. It has smell. Leadership has a presence, has a tone. And my late seminary president, the great Bill Cruz, would say often, Goody, sometimes leadership is best defined in its absence.
Mm.
And we certainly, in the last few years, have seen what happens when leadership is void in the moment. It can
Yeah,
literally cost lives.
it's true. And actually, I think that's one of the blessings that COVID has given us is reflection and to see exactly what it is we don't want.
Sure. I agree. Totally agree. I think I was telling a colleague of mine who lives in Atlanta, he's in journalism and to some degree like you in the work, but I said, COVID forced everyone to recalibrate, reassess, and the things that I often say, sometimes we major on the minor and minor on the major. COVID put it in
True.
perspective, right? The things that we once held so valuable, so dear, that we thought were important, maybe vice versa, of course.
Yeah. So getting back to your church, do you provide pastoral care every weekend?
Yeah, we do. It's called Flourishing Church. I'm one of the volunteer pastors. I'm an elder at the church. It's led by two amazing people, Rachel and Israel Campbell. Shout out to them. But yeah, we have a time where we gather together and examine the scriptures. There's music. There's time where we connect in what we call our community groups, which is basically a time where we break out into various areas with all over the South Bay in homes and coffee shops, and where we literally live life together. We talk through hurts, hangups, and hopes. We maybe take a book study, in some instances, the scriptures even, and we sort of walk with people in terms of this thing called life. And we are committed to doing that. We've been doing that for some time now. And for me, my faith is sort of, it's the epicenter. Speaking of Compton, Compton is known as the hub city because it's in the center of all of Los Angeles. And I often tell people, the thing that's at the center of your life, make sure it's foundational, it's secure, it's
Mm.
stable, it has redeeming value. And so for me, that's my faith. And so Compton is literally called the hub city. And so I often ask leaders, what's at the hub? What's at the center of your life? That whatever that is, make sure that it's something that can withstand times of uncertainty, times of confusion, times of instability. And those are all true realities that we've experienced here in the last few years, certainly.
True that. So I know a lot of preparation goes into a sermon. It's you've got to practice, you've got to write it, and how do you juggle that with speaking and traveling, or do you do a lot of it virtually?
No, I'm on the road. I'm on the road full time. I have been, even with COVID, it was shut down a little bit, but then it picked up virtually. But no, I often tell people sermon preparation or giving a talk, whether it's to a university or a group of football players or, private equity company or, a real estate firm, doing leadership development with a nonprofit. You know, if you're living what you're talking about, the prep isn't that difficult.
Hmm. I love
I
that.
mean, I don't mean to sound arrogant or crass about it, but I just think um, there is a there needs to be a consistency from the words you speak from the stage to the life you live off of it.
Mm.
And so if I'm talking about Kingmaker, or if I'm talking about habits, and another book I wrote, I actually live those things. I try to live them. I'm not perfect though by any stretch of the imagination, but I've actually tried to influence people of influence to use their platforms for good, addressing
Mm.
issues of voting rights, issues of massive incarceration, issues of homelessness, issues related to white nationalism, racism. So, those are conversations I've had, best police practices. I've had those conversations with chiefs of police, with police departments, with fire departments, with if I'm talking about diversity, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm having those conversations with entities and organizations. So I'm not just giving a speech. I'm not just giving a sermon. I'm not just giving a message. I'm not just uttering a tweet. Those are actually conversations and lifestyles in which I'm trying to advance in my own way, in my own life, rather, but also in the lives of others.
Yeah. So I mean, you work with a lot of athletic departments and sports teams, and for me, in my experience, there really is no bigger character builder than team sports. What are some of the things that you have taught some of these athletes to grow and communicate with each other and to lead by example?
I think a part of your question it broke up again, but I think you were talking about what are some things that I've taught with regard to these organizations that I've worked with. Yeah, no. So character, synergy, teamwork, collaboration, sacrifice. I won't give the team, but I had years ago when I first sort of got into this business of speaking specifically also to sports team. I remember one coach, very prominent head coach, said, "Hey, your job is not to motivate my players to play. At this level, they need no motivation to play." So I said, "Check that off. Understood. We got you here for all the other stuff." So I've taken that sort of posture when I go into an organization, sports teams in particular. I'm not on a chalkboard writing X's and O's, talking about executing and catching a pass, running fast, dunking a ball, hitting a ball. I'm talking to them about things like character. That at one point in time, your athleticism and your giftedness, it may be at the zenith now, the height, but there will come a day when you won't be able to run as fast, when you won't be able to jump as high. Your character, or I would say your talent, is what gets you on the field, in the room, but your character is what will have you remaining in the room.
Mm.
Character is that currency that does not fluctuate over time. So I talk to the athletes about making good decisions. Don't do stupid stuff. Excuse my French. Don't. Hey, we're coming into the season. We're getting ready to kick off fall camp. Remember, it's like your decisions are like the ripple effect, like a rock or a pebble hitting or skipping across on the water. We think that if a rock lands, sometimes that fails to skip. We think that's the end of it. But when that rock hits that water, there is actually either on the surface or underneath, there's a ripple effect. That water moves. What is true with a rock or pebble hitting water is true for you as an athlete and your decisions you make. If I make this decision here, what is the implications for not only me, but my family, my team, and this institution that I represent, whether it's the professional Dodgers, God rest his soul, Vin Scully, my beloved Lakers or Raiders, or a major university. What is it? Whatever it is, I have to remember I'm part of a whole now. So I talk about character. I talk about synergy. You can have the right amount of talent. You can even have the people with the right passion and zeal, but it's something about chemistry. If you don't have, it's what Jim
Mm.
Collins talks about, right? People on the bus, in the right seats. Some of those people off the bus, in his work, Good to Great, and the follow up, Built to Last. You gotta have that right synergy, that right cohesiveness. So it's not just about talent, right? Character is important, and then I talk about things like diversity, particularly when I'm dealing with coaches and staffs, athletic directors, presidents of universities who represent these institutions, CEOs, presidents of professional teams. So, I talk about, does your executive level of leadership within this organization, does it look like the community that you
Yeah,
serve? That's important. So I talk
it
about things
is.
like that: diversity, leadership, character, synergy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and that chemistry isn't just on the field, it comes from the coaches too. So
That's right.
one
All
last
about
one
leadership.
last yes. And one last question for you. People want to be heard and seen. What message can you give someone to provide them starting today with some hope for the future?
Oh, that's easy. There's a thing called legacy, and I talk about, most people focus on arriving well. I think you need to be mindful of leaving well. If we
Mm.
begin with the end in mind, it will dictate how we arrive. So I'm coming into this new organization. I just got this new job, whether it's in professional sports or entertainment, or in the private sector, in the military, whatever it is. I'm coming into this place of work, this place that will pay me money to do a thing. I am a representative of this entity. And I tell people, most of us will not be with an entity or organization the entirety of our lives. So I tell people, when you're coming into that place, begin with the end in mind. How is it, or what is it that I want to be said of me, and the work ethic that I have brought to this space, and the ethics for which I have modeled about my life in this space? What is it that I want to be said? What will that, and ideally, what would I want that to look like? I tell people, you're going to leave your job one of two ways. You're either going to leave in a conference room with a cake and people celebrating you, or by an email saying your items will be mailed to you. and I've had both. I've had both, and unfortunately I've been on the delivering end of both. So I tell people, if I would tell people right now, just be mindful of, not just for the moment, be mindful of legacy, man.
Hmm.
This is, we get one chance, regardless of what you think about faith. Or I think this life should not be a practice run. We should optimize with all we can to do to advance excellence. Doesn't mean we don't have grace, but I just kind of go, man, I'm showing up to this institution. I'm showing up to this organization. They've entrusted me, whether it's for a talk I'm giving, or for an employment they're offering, or for a platform they're providing. Man, I'm best. Like, there is no more. This is the most important conversation I'm having right now. This is not one of 10. This is one of one. And so it is my posture. It should be our posture that, with that, in terms of how we advance not only the mission and goals of an organization we represent, but in the lifestyle we're committed to live. And I think if we do that, lastly, I close with this. We do not control the day of our birth, and most of us will never not control the day of our death. But what we do control is the dash, the
Mm.
line that separates the two. So be mindful of the dash. Man, it's all about the dash. The dash is the decisions you make, the relationships you form, how you spend your time, when you ask for forgiveness, when you take responsibility, when you lean in, press in, when you become the voice, when you become the one who welcomes a stranger, when you become the Samaritan on the Jericho road, welcoming in the person who is bruised and battered by life. When you look out for the least, the leftover, and those who are down on their luck. That's dash. That's dash stuff.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great way to end this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I enjoyed your questions. They caused
Thank
me to
you.
think greatly. I certainly appreciate it.
Good, good. Thank you.